Derrida, is that true things are not in fact true. They only feel that way because we're all trained to look past the way language manipulates us and shapes our encounter with the world. Once you look at and deconstruct that linguistic aspect, you realize it's rhetoric all the way down. From this argument, other theorists dug into the politics of why things are constructed like this and not like that. So now, all of a sudden, every subject you can imagine is consumed, sort of dissolved and devoured from underneath by this study of the rhetorical construction of everything and the operations of power that are served by that construction. It doesn't matter if it's architecture or fashion or social norms or literature and poetry, everything is suddenly being deconstructed along these sort of critical rhetorical lines, all based on the assumption that there's no there, it's just power. It's really hard to convey how disorienting this was. On the one hand, one of the things that was mind-blowing about deconstruction was this sense that the world came alive. Things that had just felt inert and stable around me, suddenly felt alive. I could see the historical trajectories that had brought the built environment to the form it was. It was as though the world had come alive in another dimension, like I was looking directly at spiritual realities, and yet, at the same time, the same theory was telling me there is no transcendent reality, only power. Really dark. This is the most brutal, sort of metaphysical bait and switch you can imagine. Because for Derrida, there's no there. Everything is just a social construction. There's no meaning, there's no truth, there's only power. It's like being handed enlightenment and simultaneously told it's a cynical lie. I'm trying to deal with that, because I'm going to take things very much to heart. It's just power. I found that, at the time, bizarrely appealing. It seems odd to say that now. But for me, it seemed like, maybe this is a way out of my dinner table dilemma. What if I can deconstruct and reconstruct my sort of gendered presentation in the world? What if there really is no there? And I can just, by sheer force of personality, become something other than what everybody perceives me as? It seemed like a good idea at the time. It also fried my brain, not least because it's not actually true. And then it all fell apart in the year of the global financial crash. That was the end of history proper. The beginning of the end of history was probably 9/11, but the end of the end of history was the crash. It's a long story and a painful one, but I lost my social circle, I lost my best friend, I lost my startup, I lost all of my ideals. And that was the point where I realized I no longer believed in progress. The more I pulled at the idea, the more questionable it seemed. How is it possible to claim that things are better now in some absolute sense than, say, ancient Rome? How do you make that case? Some things are better, some things are arguably worse, like they didn't have a hole in the ozone layer. Nor do we anymore, but they didn't have factory farming either, that's pretty evil. Or nuclear bombs. But they had slavery. How can you evaluate all of this without being omniscient? And that, I realized as I thought about it, is the clue, the God-shaped hole, the omniscient, the postulated, putative, omniscient person who's able to evaluate all of this is a God-shaped hole. And that's the clue to what the idea of progress actually is. It's a theological story in disguise. Really, it's Christian eschatology with the transcendent bits sanded flat. Really, it's the best advice anyone ever gave me. I went to see my grandma. She was a great friend and mentor to me. And she said to me, out of the blue, completely unprompted, Mary, I think you should grow your hair and get married. That a lot of women have jobs, not careers. And they still have to go back to work. And I was thinking, okay, so if your job is putting packets through a scanner all day, are you really liberated by being freed from looking after your baby? Are you really liberated by missing your baby's first steps to put packets through a scanner? I'm not sure that adds up. So I started reading. I realized there have been so many feminists who've tried to make the case for motherhood. It happens again and again and again, and every single time it gets memory hold again. And I was thinking, this is interesting. Why does this keep happening? Why do the maternal feminists keep getting memory hold? And I began to suspect there's something bigger going on. And the omission was not accidental. It's baked into the modern worldview. And as I read further, I came to understand something else. The history of the women's movement is really the history of technology. And the reason we can't see motherhood in the women's movement is because we've been through a tech transition more recently, which has just written that whole story out of the picture. But that actually, if you go back to the history of the early history of the women's movement, it was sort of rudely dismissed as the first wave, and nobody really thinks about it apart from the vote. But there's a whole story there, which for me really is the history of feminism. You know, understood in the terms which make sense to me, the women's movement ended with the second wave. It didn't begin in the 1960s, it ended there. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. Posed for and within family life. By the way, industrialization changed the world. So, I mean, we talk about homemakers and breadwinners. You know, I talk about my parents' family order as traditional, but it's not actually, this is the paradox. This arrangement is distinctively modern. This is not what life looked like before the Industrial Revolution. Because at that point, almost everyone worked, unless you were incredibly wealthy. Everybody worked. Men's work and women's work were different, but almost no one was, quote unquote, economically inactive, as their stay-at-home mums are sometimes rudely described. The central economic unit was not the individual, as it is now, it was the household. Most work happened in the home, outside the formal financial sort of exchange-based marketplace. Women's work was typically processing raw materials into good for the family, so market gardening, cheese and butter, textile making. And the kind of work which is sort of reasonably geographically constrained and compatible with having little kids underfoot. In the book, the paradigmatic example I've given is textile making, which has historically almost always been women's work, 40,000 years of textile making being women's work. And there are robust, very practical reasons for that. If you're hand weaving, the loom can be raised off the ground. The work is interruptible, it's pretty social, and all of which is compatible with having crawling babies or little toddlers running around and needing to put it down to stop them climbing into the fireplace or something. And so textile making has always been women's work. Actually, textile making was one of the first sectors to be industrialized. I've always found this very interesting. It was one of the first processes to be drained from the home by technology and centralized in factories. And of course, once it left the home and was centralized in factories, you know, there were lots of women who still worked in textile mills, but you suddenly have a new set of logistical problems. So, you know, you don't have the loom raised off the ground in your home anymore. Suddenly you've got to walk 5 miles to a factory and then do a 12-hour shift. What do you do with your breastfed baby? It's a problem. Women's response to the transformation of work into something which happened outside the home in other places typically fell into two patterns, which I've characterized as the feminism of care and the feminism of freedom. So the feminism of care covers a huge body of writing, almost all by women, which tends to be dismissed, again, I think, rudely by feminist historiographers as the cult of domesticity, so-called. And women would write about the private domestic virtues of women, the need for a space of retreat from economic competition, the value of nurture, the beauty of education, the home as a place of respite from the marketplace. And to me, this is all a straightforwardly feminist body of work, even if it's read as reactionary now, because what it's making a case for care, domesticity, motherhood, non-commercial human goods, outside the realm of the marketplace. This is women saying our work still matters, even if everything is now counted financially, and even if now the measure of value is what can be counted on a balance sheet. That's not all there is, and actually all of this stuff still matters. So the feminism of freedom was, emerged out of, a very real need to respond to some of these challenges. And out of this came the campaign for women's political personhood. Out of this came the campaign for women's property rights. And the whole early feminist movement, which really made the case, the sort of governing theme is women's right to enter the market on the same terms as men. But really it's about disaggregating the productive household into an order which recognizes both men and women as individuals, and the individual as the fundamental unit of society. But more conventionally, we might call this the transhumanist era, the point where we turned from industrializing the world to industrializing ourselves. The first mass market transhumanist technology was the birth control pill, 50 years ago. We are 50 years, half a century into the transhumanist era. This isn't some sci-fi thing which might happen in 10 years. We're 50 years into it. Consider, the pill does something fundamentally different to every previous medicine. To that point, medicine set out to fix what was broken. So I have a broken arm, I go see the doctor fixes my arm. All of this happens with reference to a shared understanding of what normal health looks like, what normal human physiology looks like. You know, the template, what normal health is just understood by everybody, and everybody takes it for granted that health is just health. But the pill does something very different. It doesn't set out to fix something which is broken, like my broken wrist or my asthma or whatever. The pill sets out to break something which is working, which is to say normal female, healthy, functioning fertility. And it does so in the name of personal freedom. This is a radical departure for medicine. The legalization of abortion. Early advocates of birth control believed and argued that birth control would reduce the number of unplanned pregnancies. Overall, it did, except it also didn't. Because it reduced the number of unplanned pregnancies relative to the overall number of extramarital encounters. However, the number of extramarital encounters went up so dramatically that the absolute number of unplanned pregnancies didn't shrink, it grew. And that drove calls for abortion to be legalized, because so many women were dying in backstreet abortions. But when this passed, a whole new model of women's personhood was institutionalized and became the foundation both of feminism and also of the modern contemporary understanding, really, of what a person is, particularly what a female person is. And we can read this as a defeat of the feminism of care by the feminism of freedom. Why? Legalizing abortion gave women the right to end the life of an unborn child, a child dependent on its mother's body for survival. This right is framed as a matter of bodily autonomy, an absolute right for women, a sine qua non for existing as a person. Wherever you stand on abortion, and I realize this is a sensitive issue, it's very clear that this institutionalizes the primacy of autonomy over care. And it makes choice a central plank of feminism. This has since become the vector for progress, understood solely in terms of autonomy. RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, expressed this in a 1978 paper, where she emphasizes a woman's autonomous control of her full life's course, up to and including in control of pregnancy. And she characterizes this as essential to a woman's ability to stand, I quote, in relation to man, society, and the state, as an independent, self-sustaining, equal citizen. So, in effect, personhood is conflated with participation in the market, and all of this rests on the foundation of the right to privilege autonomy over care. In this context, no wonder mothers don't really show up as people. As I discovered, pushing my buggy around the small town, I'm still there. And no wonder being a mum is low status. And no wonder women are so ambivalent about it. But there's more. This also yoked women's personhood, our ability to exist, to show up as people, to transhumanism. The pill and abortion became central to autonomy. Since then, every woman, in order to be a person, you must effectively accept a life as a cyborg. A type of personhood which is inextricable from dependence on a biomedical technology. The capacity to control fertility, up to and including the right to end a pregnancy, came to be accepted as the normal baseline for personhood. And we've all accepted, without even realizing it, a vision of human autonomy and personhood that, for women, can only be realized with the help of biotech. We're all cyborgs now. So that's how we began the transhumanist era. 50 years in, how's it going? The first example followed swiftly from the pill, which really did increase freedom for bourgeois women who benefited from the ability to plan their lives, study, take jobs. But it also opened women's bodies to the market, because if you own yourself, why shouldn't you sell yourself? So college degrees and high-flying jobs for some. For others, no argument, no anymore against a job in the sex industry. By the early 1970s already, the feminists who were demanding the pill were also protesting the porn industry, not realizing that the same technology and ideology of bodily autonomy underpins both. When we zoom out a bit more, a general principle becomes clear. Every time we use a technology to escape a previously natural limit, we open new space for commerce. Freedom and trade are two sides of the same coin, and this logic has governed the advance of biotech ever since. Now, we have big fertility, with a thriving trade in gametes. I believe Stanford undergraduates can sell their eggs for a premium, especially if they're pretty. Yeah, it's kind of gross. I made a case for grounding our resistance in embodiment and our interpersonal lives, trying to rebuild a livable settlement between the sexes. reopening space for accepting that men and women are different, and that some types of work should be segregated by sex, paradigmatically, childcare and the military. Rewilding sex, which is to say rebellion against the contraceptive paradigm. But it doesn't stop at transgender ideology. The picture is much bigger than that. And it's a mistake, a really important, very significant mistake, to imagine that transhumanism is a left-wing thing exclusively. It's not. It's just as prevalent on the right as well. The ideological war on the idea of human nature continues. There are startups seem to spring up every day, promising to gene-edit babies for intelligence or other desirable attributes. Others aspire to make aging a treatable medical condition rather than a normal feature of human life. Decide with the age of Francis Bacon and the inception of the scientific model. Now, we could be here all night talking about scholasticism. I won't bore you with too much. But this is an account of the world as founded in universals, whose ground is the thoughts of God, and in which a full account of everything requires more than just cause and effect. It includes two additional causes. So we have the stuff, the physical stuff that things are made of. We have the forces that act on something. But we also have the form of something, which is to say the shape that makes it itself. And we have what it's for, the purpose. So that's material cause, efficient cause, formal cause, and final cause. So not two causes, but four. And two of those causes have been lost. Two of those causes were first put aside and then abolished, effectively discarded, memory hold, like mothers, at the beginning of the scientific era in order to make that era of innovation possible. Now, this is a massive oversimplification of sort of whole libraries and hundreds of years of very much cleverer than me people. But the key point in relation to what I'm talking about here is this. The technological mindset rejects formal and final cause. The medieval view, which saw all of creation as sacred, ultimately originating in the mind of God, was stripped away beginning in the 17th century, and even then persisted much longer in relation to humans than it did to the rest of the world. The idea that the human form and the human purpose are sacred survived very much longer, even in medicine, even through the era of modern medicine with its aspects of objectification, still, until the 1960s, persisted within this basic paradigm of normal human health, which is implicitly the human form. And somewhere in the background of that is the understanding, which persists all the way from early Christendom, that humans are made in God's image, the imago Dei. So let me restate that. If you reject the idea that humans have a form, that we have a nature, and that form is directed to some end, human flourishing, kids, posterity, the transcendent, but if you reject that idea, you have nowhere to stand when you argue that some innovation or other is wrong or unnatural. It's just there's no there. There's only power. All of this is predicated on the assertion that there's no such thing as human nature. As should be clear by now, this leads nowhere good. It leads to the commodification of bodies, the exploitation of the poor, the abuse of children, and ultimately the creation of monsters. If I can be plain, waging war on imago Dei may look abstract, but it's profoundly evil. This is just as true when those waging war code as right-wing, as some of the eugenicists and human augmentation crowd do, as when they fly a rainbow flag. But most importantly, they're just wrong. It's not, in fact, possible to abolish human nature. In the book, I quoted Horace, Naturam expellas foca, tamen usque recurret, a very famous line from Horace. You can drive nature out with a pitchfork, but still she comes back. And that's actually where I see cause for optimism. We're 50 years into the transhumanist era. The fantasy of abolishing or transcending our own nature, still not realized. Take the pill as an example. 50 years of receipts. The utopians, its early defenders, imagined it would flatten all of the distinctions between the sexes. We'd have a perfect sexual utopia. That's not what happened. If anything, sex differences in how we choose mates are more pronounced than ever. And far from delivering some kind of erotic utopia, what we have today is an epidemic of sexual anomie and a collapsing birth rate. Those who are bucking the reproductive trend are almost all sex realist and religious. Run that trend for a generation or two, The society that comes out the other side of the global demographic pinch point is more sex realist or religious than the one we have at present. You can drive nature out with a pitchfork, but still she comes back. I take great comfort from seeing this sea change. The sex realist feminist movement emerged to challenge the ideological assault on sex dimorphism. It says, no, sex is real and immutable and politically salient. You can drive nature out with a pitchfork, and still she comes back. I believe the resurgence in Christian faith represents something similar. It says, no, human nature is real, and it really is sacred, and this is the story from within which it makes sense. Against the Fourth Industrial Revolution, nothing else offers a robust enough foundation to enable us to discern where we may rightly apply our powers of innovation to the benefit of all, and where we must not, without sawing at the branch on which we're sitting. I'm still hopeful that we might be able to develop this kind of discernment, and I'm certain that, if we don't, we'll find ourselves there eventually, having learned the hard way, that you can drive nature out with a pitchfork and still she comes back.